Welcome to Sports CTO Talks. Today, in this episode, we will talk about sports tech and how teams are using player data to gain a competitive edge. In this series, we would be connecting with industry leaders from the sports and technology world. I am Ami, your guide on this journey through amazing mind of sports tech leaders. We will dive deep into discussions driving the industry. From AI to cloud, from cybersecurity to sustainability. If it is sports tech, we are talking about it. Today, we are joined by Ben Slingerland, a sports technology leader with deep experience across athlete performance, GPS wearables, video analysis, and sports data. Ben is currently the sales head of North America with Player Data, where he focuses on helping teams, coaches, athletes use performance tracking technology in more practical and accessible way. Before this, he spent several years at Catapult Sports, working closely with NCAA, MLC, and high performance environments around athlete monitoring and video analysis. His journey also includes experience with organizations like Nike, NCAA, IMG Academy, and giving him a rare view of sports from multiple angles: athlete development, sports business, performance technology, and team operations. We welcome you, Ben, to the podcast.
Thanks, Ami, for having me. Really excited.
Absolutely. So, my first question, it's a basic one. How do sports wearables differ from consumer fitness trackers in the terms of, data precision and application?
Yeah, so sports wearables, the easiest way to explain what they are, kind of like Fitbit on steroids for, historically pro and elite athletes. But now what we've seen in the industry is they're becoming more and more available for high school and youth athletes, which is in part the emergence of player data. But yeah, wearables are a small device. Actually, I have some here where you can see these. It looks like this, sits in between
Okay.
your shoulder blades and measures everything you can imagine, from distance to speed to acceleration, deceleration, and it helps with performance while reducing soft tissue injuries.
Okay. So, how do GPS tracking devices worn by football and rugby players capture the real-time movement, and what specific biomechanical metrics do they generate?
Yeah, so the main metrics that this technology captures hundreds and hundreds of different metrics, but the
Okay.
big ones that people hone in on are distance, right? That's a very basic metric. And then high speed distance is also one that's really important. So um, that's distance covered over there's different velocity bands based on the athlete's top speed. Top speed's another one that's kind of that sexy metric. Accelerations and decelerations, and those are also broken into different bands: high, medium, and low. XL decels. Load. So different companies have different names for this. Catapult calls it player load. Player data calls it acceleration load. But that's basically the accumulation of accelerations across all three planes: side to side, forward, back, up, and down. Um, so those are some of the big ones in those sports. You mentioned American football, rugby. Yeah.
So, in what ways, as you were discussing about the load, in what ways player load management has evolved since teams started using wearable tech? And what is the science behind preventing soft tissue injuries? Because that is, a common part when sports is involved, using the workload data, accumulated workload data.
Yes, yeah, so that's right. One of the big value props on wearable technology is not necessarily preventing, but reducing soft tissue injuries. Um, One of the big, when I was at Catapult, one of our big early users there was Alabama football, and there's a really good soundbite from Nick Saban, their head coach, about how they had something like 27, I think it was, soft tissue injuries in preseason, and then they implemented the wearable technology, and then that next preseason they were able to reduce that number from 27 to 3, which was significant for them. And that was uh, really looking at the periodization of, there's three kind of main principles within this data. There's volume, there's intensity, and there's density. And it's understanding how to undulate that to reduce the strains or the stressors on some of your soft tissue uh, you know, muscles. And so that's how this data has been used to help reduce those. And that's where, people with much higher degrees than I have in kinesiology and exercise science, they can really get that right.
Absolutely. So, how do the HRV readings from these variables help coaching staff and the sports scientists assess a player's readiness to train or to compete at any given point?
Yeah, so you mentioned HRV, so heart rate variability. So that's there. There's two separate verticals of player tracking: external and internal. What player data tracks and what Catapult, Stat Sports, all these, they're focused on the external. The internal is that's where you're talking about a heart rate monitor. And some of these systems will have integrated heart rate monitors within their vest, but Polar is a company that's done a lot with heart rate over the years. So that's looking at an athlete's heart rate and how it kind of goes up and down over the course of a training session. Um, I think heart rate's really interesting to look at when you haven't seen an athlete for a long time and you want to see what type of shape they've come in at, what their fitness levels look like, and you can see that. There's also a lot of things that can skew heart rate. So that could be like somebody drinks a Red Bull or a coffee before practice, and that heart rate skews up. So heart rate is or HRV, right? It's slightly separate from the wearable data, but it's also I think it's good to layer it with the wearable data at the same time.
Right. So, if it is separate, what role does optical player tracking, the technology like cameras mounted in the stadiums, play alongside the wearable sensors? And how does team merge, so many datas, the HRVs, the cameras, the wearables, and how it helps in improving their performance?
Yeah, so optical tracking is definitely it's a recent trend where we've seen more and more of that come to be. And so if you're talking specifically at that elite level,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking right now like Major League Soccer here in the States where they have cameras at all the home games. So you don't have to wear a wearable device to get distance, high speed distance, and that's a trend.
Hmm.
There's several of these, pro big time athletes that, would rather not wear a vest and they'd rather have the cameras do the data collection for you. And it's getting more accurate. So that optical tracking is definitely, that's not going away. It's that technology is getting better and better. And I think at the elite levels is you might see, fewer pro athletes wearing vests in game. With that said, with training sessions, those where they're not playing in their stadium field where they have the cameras, that's where some of the gaps with the optical tracking happen. But optical tracking is definitely very valuable if you're an organization that can afford it, or you play in a pro league that has that, in all the stadiums where teams play. There's a lot of things you can do with that. You can do predictive stuff. You can see distance between players. So really interesting.
Okay. So, how is the biometric data collected from athletes governed by player union agreements? Because privacy laws like, the GDPR, the league specific regulations, and, what tensions exist between the teams and the players over the data ownership.
Yeah, so when you talk about pro leagues, you're talking about a lot of player unions and whatnot. And so one issue, and we've seen this in leagues like the NBA and NHL here in the States, where their player unions have basically negotiated in their collective bargaining agreements that you can't force a player to wear a device in a game. And I think the thought process there is, it's ironic because this technology is actually supposed to help elongate their career, but
Exactly.
I think the the pessimistic side of that is, hey, we don't want this data used against us in contract negotiations. So um, I think as people get more educated on this, and they see why this data is being used, I actually think you might see more stuff being allowed in game. But I think that's the push and the pull, not wanting data used against athletes as they're trying to earn bigger paychecks versus keeping them on the field for a long or court for a longer time.
Absolutely. Like, I was thinking of that only, that there are systems like Sports VU, the Second Spectrum to design plays, set defense schemes, and that can create issues in contracts, as you said. So, like,
Yep.
like my next question is, what is the concept of physical benchmarking in elite sports, and how does this term use historical wearable data to set position specific performance standards for recruitment and development?
Yeah, so benchmarking it's a lot of people ask when people start using our wearable trackers. Everybody wants to know, hey, what is the average distance? What is the average high speed distance? What's the average top speed? Which is great. I think it's okay. Those are good questions to ask to get a sense as to, okay, this is how we stack up. But what really matters is, every team is so unique. Every athlete is unique. So I think benchmarking can sometimes be detrimental in terms of the development of an athlete, in terms of how they want to perform, how a team wants to perform. So benchmarking's maybe good if you want to see how you stack up. But beyond that, I think you really want to look at how your team plays, how your athlete performs, and then work on you know whether it's more is not always more. Sometimes you often see, if you're talking about soccer or global football, when you run more, you're generally losing because you're chasing. So
Yes.
you have to be careful with the benchmarking.
True. Like companies like Caterpillar and StatSports report that teams using integrated wearables and performance analytics systems can achieve up to 20 to 30% reduction in the soft tissue injuries, as we were discussing previously. So how should sports scientists critically evaluate that, and what is the co-founding variable. It can be training, load management, coach changes. There are so many things. So, how to go about that?
Yeah, so I think, with that, reducing soft tissue injuries, I think it's a hard thing to measure and put a number to, right? The wearables is just one piece of the whole puzzle of the team's ecosystem, and the head coach or the coaching staff, they're making decisions based on how they prepare for their next opponent. They have they have a whole laundry list of goals that they want to set out to accomplish. And you'll hear this in sports science quite a bit, is there's multiple ways to skin a cat. And and what I mean by that is, some coaches like to really push their guys early to try to build that capacity, be really hard, and then that sets them up for the rest of the season. Some like a very gradual uptick and try to peak their capacity building kind of midway. So it goes back to this periodization. I think you want to look at a lot of this data can help show red flags, or kind of warning zones, right? Like I'll use college basketball as one example. Typically teams go away for 2 or 3 days during the Christmas break, and then typically the hardest practice in a college basketball season is the first day back. And coaches have historically, killed their players in that. Um, and anyways, yeah, I would say hard to put a definite number to that. But that's kind of a long-winded way of explaining how those coaches kind of look at load management.
Absolutely. Like, Ben, can you just explain us a day of a athlete having a wearable and how that day shapes up from morning to night? And like, you might have seen so many things from your experience. So if you could just explain us on field day.
So yeah, sorry, I mean, so explain the question one more time.
Sure,
Like,
definitely, definitely.
yeah,
On an on-field day when an athlete is getting trained, it can be an NBA athlete or a college athlete, anyone, a, a athlete wearing an wearable, any wearable it can be. So just explain us the day that, these are the hours that an athlete wears a wearable. This is the data which is being tracked. If they are not wearing, what are the issues with what will happen? Everything end to end of a wearable.
yeah, I got you. Yeah, so wearables are generally really meant to be worn on the field or the court or the rink, right, wherever they're playing. They're not necessarily meant to be worn in the weight room. You can wear them in the weight room, but the data is really useful for the actions they're doing on during the training session itself. So, an athlete goes, there's a warm up, and then, whatever drills they go into. And then, if you finish with some sort of, more extended gameplay, the data is then segmented up in the different drills. Or if it's a game, if it's a basketball player, you have your warm up, then you have your first, second, third, fourth quarters. And so then the sports scientists would look at that data across all the different segments. Um, Something we're doing at Player Data that I think is definitely a trend in the industry is making it accessible to athletes when they leave the training facility. So, if you're talking about college sports, take college soccer, for example, these athletes are doing their own thing from May to July, and a lot of them are playing quite a bit. And so our technology at Player Data, we've got a same thing, a USB-C charging cable. So same thing you charge your iPhone with, you can charge the device with, and you can upload it remotely so that your strength coach, you could be playing in India, and your strength coach in the US could see it because it's cloud-based and see what the work you're doing.
Absolutely. So how have, the smart fabrics and embedded textile sensors moved from the wearable conversions beyond the vests and the watches? And what are the performance and adoption challenges they still face in the professional sports?
Yeah. So the question is like, how have the ways you've worn the wearables specifically, how have those kind of
Yes.
matured? Yeah.
Yes.
So you can wear wearables a few different ways. I think the most traditional way is in a sports vest, and they're all, all the big wearable tracking companies are, most of them all manufactured from the same, company and whatnot. But what we've started to see is there's, some vests that have integrated heart rate, which is really interesting. Some athletes will wear the device in their waist because they don't want to wear anything up here. Some American football players will wear it in their pads. So there's multiple creative ways you can wear it. I've heard there's going to be some heart rates things you can wear it with just like around your arm, which is interesting. So they've definitely gotten more creative in terms of the ways you can wear wearable devices.
So, how is the sleep and recovery monitoring being integrated into the athlete performance programs? And what does the research say about the relationship between the sleep quality and the next day athlete output?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like sleep was a really popular thing a couple years ago, and you saw Whoop was one of the
Yes.
beneficiaries of that trend. I think sleep is very important, and I think historically it's been hard to monitor with athletes of how much sleep they get or the quality of their sleep. So now there's things like the Aura Ring, Whoop, other companies, and that is certainly layered into the. I think what a lot of these elite organizations will do is they'll take their wearable data, they'll export it into an AMS, and then they'll overlay, sleeping data, nutrition data, some RPE stuff, and so it's very important. I think there's a lot of studies that show that if you get poor quality sleep, you actually are at greater risk of injury that next day. So you want to maybe train accordingly or not train at all. Um, so yeah, that's definitely a component of performance.
True. So, what is the expected XG, the expected goals in football analytics, and how does it develop the reflective broader shift in how teams use the data to evaluate the offensive and the defensive performances rather than, the believing the traditional statistics?
Yeah. So yeah, every sport has their set of statistics that go into the game, whether it's basketball, it's, assists, points, rebounds, soccer, it's, how many times you break a line with a pass. And a lot of these stats have gotten more and more advanced. I think the physical data now adds another component to that. And it's interesting. Like different teams will play different ways. So, some teams really like their wingers to have exceptional high speed to get around the back line if we're talking about football. Well, how many times do they hit? What percentage of their max speed do they hit that? Right? If you're talking about American football, the special teamers, they should be hitting 95% of their max speed every time they run down the field to cover a kick, right? Things like that. So I think this data uh, is is being layered with sports specific data now, given the various data streams that you can get from video analysis and other things, where it gives more context to the wearable data or vice versa, right? So I'll use my sport as an example, soccer or global football. Um, you might see your center forward make 20 high velocity sprints. Great. Well, hopefully those sprints are going to the goal where they're creating goal scoring opportunities rather than sprinting to defend on a counter attack or whatever it might be. So it's giving extra meaning to the wearable data that's also using some of the sport specific analytics statistics. That makes sense.
Absolutely. There is another concept of digital twins, right? So, how does that concept, creating a virtual model of an individual player, enable teams to stimulate training loads or rehabilitation timelines and in game performances under different scenarios?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, so I think in terms of like a digital twin concept, I think when you get an understanding of what a game load looks like and what and the physical expectations of a player are, you can make them more adaptable to that environment. So, for example, looking at Major League Soccer, right? They play once a week. You want to make sure that those athletes are getting, hitting at least 90% of their top speed, right, at some point in that week. So it's definitely a part of the wearable, the wearable data ecosystem, being able to make sure athletes are able to take a lot of those game loads.
Absolutely. Now, a question, in what ways has the user data analytics widened the competitive gap between resource-rich clubs and the smaller franchisees? Because that is a case which can be seen very evidently. And what are the strategies, the smaller teams are using to compete analytical on a budget? Because you come from a sales background also. So, how does that play a role there?
Yeah, so historically, the wearable data or the GPS technology has been only really accessible to the top clubs. I remember when I
Correct.
was first exposed to it, when I was working at IMG Academy, it was the Power Four college teams and those that had a lot of resources. And I think if you look at where we're at today, with companies like Player Data that has been able to democratize it, that actually has gotten shorter. What happens with technology over time, generally the price of technology comes down and it gets better. Like LED TVs, right? Like 10 years ago, you could buy a nice LED TV for $3,000. Today, you could buy a nice one for $300. And so this is actually, in my opinion, has gotten less of a problem. I think if you were to rewind the clock 10, 15 years ago, I think there was a major gap. But today, I think with how technology has evolved, this has actually gotten a little smaller in that there are technologies that can do 90% of what a lot of the expensive ones can do. But everybody's still looking for that 1% advantage, right? There's still some really expensive technologies out there that only a few can afford, that might give you that 0.1% advantage. So it's still out there, but I think that's actually shrunk a bit.
Okay. Like I have lot of questions, Ben, for you, but I will stick to one last question. Like, what do you see and how do you see wearables, growing into the next 5 to 7 years into the sports market? Like, it is a in thing. Is it going to be useful, not useful? And, how, at what rate is it going to grow, if it is going to grow?
Yeah. So I think with the technology, there's right now this marketplace, it's very splintered. It's still very segmented. And you started to see some of the bigger players in the sports technology field acquire um, more. There's more and more acquisitions happening. And I think that will continue to happen to the point where there's only going to be maybe just a few players in this space, but they'll have the whole stack, right? So they'll have wearables, they'll have video, they'll have everything that goes into sports performance technology. They'll have an AMS or an operating system where they can keep their data. They'll have a data visualization tool. They'll have velocity VBT stuff. So I think what's going to happen is that I think the data sets are going to come downstream. So I think there's a big trend in making this technology accessible to youth and high school athletes, right? At least here in the States, there's a theme of professionalization of youth sports where now that you can get paid in collegiate sports here in the States, I think a lot of parents want to make sure that their kids can have every opportunity to put themselves in that position to make a lot of money in college. And so that I think will continue to happen. And things like this, like wearable data, it's all part of it in terms of the recruiting and whatnot. So it's exciting. It's scary. I think there's a lot of things, but I think what we're seeing is we're getting smarter and smarter in terms of how we can advance athletic development. Like youth athletes are getting better and better because of this. So it's all very exciting.
Perfect. We'll move on to the next segment into the podcast. That's the rapid fire round. I'll ask you a few questions and you'll have to be quick in answering. It can be
Yep.
either one word or one sentence. Okay.
Okay.
Who is your favorite player of all time?
Oh, Tom Brady.
Okay. If you had to take him for dinner, where would it be?
All right, say that again.
If you had to take him for dinner, where would it be? Which place?
Yeah, I'm from Boston. I like Zuma, a sushi restaurant here.
Okay. Name one wearable brand widely used in elite football for GPS tracking.
Uh, I'll say my former employer, Catapult.
Okay. Is true or false? Teams can legally share a player's biometric data with third parties without consent under most legal regulations.
False.
Which US major sport was the first to embed player tracking chips into the match ball or equipment used in live games?
Believe that was Major League Soccer.
Okay, that's a nice one. You remembering it very nice. Name any two physical performance metrics that a GPS vest collects during a 90-minute football match.
Um, Load, and we can say high speed distance.
Okay. What is the aura ring primarily used for in an athletic performance context?
Sleep.
Perfect. We'll move on to the next segment. That's you'll have to just answer one question into 30 seconds.
Okay.
What what is the role of AI in using player data to gain a competitive edge in today's world?
Yeah, so this is something Player Data has leaned heavily into the last year or so, and that is using AI to help coaches get real-time answers for things they're looking for. So Player Data has developed a tool called CoachMate that you can basically, it gives you a summary of every session. It can help you develop individual development plans. It can give you benchmarking data. And so effectively using AI to pull relevant, actionable insights for coaches in a very quick way.
Perfect. Thank you, Ben, for sharing your insights and joining us today on the podcast.
Thanks, Ami, for having me.
Absolutely. So, everyone, let's stay connected for more understanding on sports and technology in the future. If you are building anything or if you want to share insights, any ideas, strategies, please comment in the section. Ben or I will definitely reach out to you. That was Ben sharing his insights. We will meet in the next week in the next episode. Until then, stay curious, stay inspired, and keep exploring.